The first thing I learned about fear was that it never arrived screaming. It came quietly, like the ache behind my eyes when I opened them that morning and saw gray light leaking through the crooked blinds of my apartment. For one disoriented second, I forgot what day it was. Then I rolled onto my side, and the sharp pull in my ribs reminded me of everything I'd spent the night trying not to remember. I lay there staring at the water stain on the ceiling while the radiator hissed like it had a secret to tell. My phone buzzed on the crate I used as a bedside table. 3 missed calls. 2 texts. All from Ryan. The last one read, "Don't embarrass me again." My stomach turned so hard I pressed a hand over it and breathed through my mouth. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere downtown. Inside, the apartment smelled like cold coffee, drugstore makeup, and the kind of tired that never really washed off. I pushed myself up slowly and crossed the room in my socks, every step careful, measured. The mirror above the sink was too honest for 7 in the morning. There was a faint shadow near my cheekbone, another one just below my collarbone, and a bruise on my wrist the shape of someone else's bad temper. I stood there with concealer in one hand and my dignity in the other, trying to decide which one would be easier to fake. By 8:30, I was in the back room of Belladonna, knotting my black apron with fingers that still wouldn't stop trembling. Friday nights at Belladonna were always brutal, even before the chandeliers lit up and the rich started laughing too loudly over wine they couldn't pronounce. The restaurant lived on polished silver, low amber light, and the illusion that everyone inside belonged there. I didn't belong there. I just knew how to glide between white tablecloths and make strangers feel important for $22 an hour plus tips. "You look pale," Maria whispered as she stacked menus beside me. "I'm fine," I lied automatically. She gave me the kind of look women give each other when they know the truth, but understand why you can't say it out loud. The dinner rush hit hard at 6:30. Orders flew in. Glasses clinked. The espresso machine hissed like it was angry at the world. I kept moving because stopping felt dangerous. As long as I moved, nobody looked too closely. As long as I smiled, nobody asked questions. Then the front doors opened, and the whole room changed. It wasn't dramatic at first. No music stopped. No one gasped. But a current moved through Belladonna so suddenly that even I felt it from across the floor. Heads turned without meaning to. Conversations softened. Men who usually snapped their fingers at servers sat up straighter, like schoolboys caught misbehaving. I followed their attention and saw him step inside. Tall, dark suit, no umbrella, even though rain still glossed the streets outside. He moved like the weather had made room for him. 2 men came in behind him, both silent, both sharp-eyed, but nobody in that room mattered once he crossed the threshold. His name traveled ahead of him in a whisper from the hostess stand. Dominic Moretti. I didn't know much about men like that, but I knew enough to stay out of their way. I grabbed a tray of fresh coffee and kept my eyes down. Table 12 was suddenly mine, and when I looked up and realized where I was headed, my pulse stumbled so hard it almost hurt. Dominic Moretti had taken the center seat, one hand resting near his untouched water glass, his expression unreadable in the golden light. I was 3 steps away when my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. Just once, but it was enough. My grip slipped. The tray tilted, and before I could stop it, hot coffee spilled straight across the front of his perfectly black suit. People always talk about humiliation like it burns hot, but that is not true. Real humiliation is cold. It was the cold rush under my skin as the coffee spread across Dominic Moretti's jacket, the cold silence that dropped over table 12, the cold certainty that I had just destroyed the only job keeping my lights on. The tray slipped from my hands a second later and hit the floor with a crack that sounded too loud for a room full of money. Someone near the bar gasped. My manager, Victor, was moving before I could even breathe, his polished shoes flashing across the marble as he came straight for me with panic written all over his face. "Hannah, what on earth is wrong with you?" he hissed, keeping his voice low for the guests but sharp enough to cut skin. I was already reaching for a linen napkin, already stammering an apology that would not come together right, because my mouth had gone dry and my heart was beating too fast. "I am so sorry," I whispered. "I did not mean to. I can clean it. I will pay for the cleaning. Please, I am so sorry." Victor grabbed my elbow too hard and pulled me back from the table like I was a fire he needed to extinguish. "Go to the kitchen," he snapped. "Do not make this worse." But before I could move, a voice cut through the air, quiet and perfectly controlled. Take your hand off her. Victor froze. Everyone did. Dominic had not raised his voice. He did not need to. He sat there with coffee staining the front of his black suit like it had happened to someone else, one hand resting on the edge of the table, his gaze fixed not on Victor, not on the damage, but on me. More specifically, on my wrist. My sleeve had ridden up when Victor grabbed me. The bruise showed clear under the amber light, ugly and impossible to explain away from this distance. Victor released me so fast, it was almost comical. Sir, I deeply apologize, he said, all polished fear now. The girl is not usually so careless. I will handle this immediately. Dominic's eyes never left mine. I said let her stay. Victor swallowed. Of course. I should have thanked him. I should have said something smart, something graceful, something that might save a shred of dignity. Instead I just stood there, breathing too shallow, feeling every eye in the restaurant slide over my skin like I was something exposed. Dominic rose slowly from his chair, and the movement alone changed the temperature around us. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Not because he looked angry. Anger, I understood. Anger was loud. Predictable. Dominic looked calm, and somehow that was worse. His features were sharp and composed. Dark hair brushed neatly back. Jaw set. Eyes almost black in the low light. He reached for the napkin in my shaking hand, and set it gently on the table. Look at me, he said. I did. I wish I had not. There was nothing careless in the way he watched people. It felt like being. Reed, who did that to your wrist? The question landed harder than it should have. Heat rushed into my face. I hit a shelf in the stockroom, I said too quickly. His gaze dropped briefly to the fading shadow near my collarbone, then back to my face. He knew I was lying. I knew he knew, but he did not embarrass me by saying it. He only studied me for one long second, then turned his head slightly toward Victor. She is done for the night, he said. You will still pay her for the full shift. Victor blinked. Sir, that is not our usual policy. Dominic adjusted one cuff with unhurried precision. Then tonight you have a new one. Nobody argued after that. Not Victor. Not the men at Dominic's table. Not even me. I should have felt relieved, but relief was not what rose inside me as I untied my apron in the back hallway 10 minutes later. It was dread, because Ryan would notice the missing hours on my paycheck. Ryan noticed everything. My fingers were still clumsy when I reached for my coat, hanging by the service entrance. Maria appeared beside me with wide eyes and pressed my bag into my hands. Hannah, she whispered, there is a car outside waiting for you. I stared at her. What car? She looked toward the back door like she was afraid it might hear her. The one Mr. Moretti sent. Some gifts feel like kindness. Others feel like warnings dressed in expensive packaging. I stood by the service entrance with my coat half on, staring through the narrow pane of glass at the black sedan idling under the alley light. Rain had started again, soft and steady, silver against the pavement. The car looked too polished for this part of downtown, too clean for a back alley that smelled like damp brick, fryer oil, and old city heat trapped in concrete. Maria hovered beside me, twisting a dish towel between her hands. You do not have to take it, she whispered. I almost laughed at that. People like me were always taking things we did not want because the alternative was usually worse. A ride, a shift, a lie, an apology. I pulled my coat tighter around me and pushed open the door. Cold air hit my face hard enough to wake me up a little. One of the rear doors opened before I reached the curb. The man stepping out was not Dominic Moretti, just one of the men who had come in behind him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe early 40s, with the kind of expression that never invited unnecessary conversation. Miss Brooks, he said, like my name had already been handed to him and filed away somewhere permanent. Mr. Moretti asked that we take you home. I stopped 3 feet from the car. That is not necessary. He nodded once, as if he had expected that answer. Probably not. But he asked anyway. I should have said no again. I should have called a cab or taken the subway like I always did, shoulders tight, keys threaded between my fingers, pretending I was not counting footsteps behind me. But my head still hurt, my hands were still shaking, and the thought of standing underground under fluorescent lights while my phone buzzed with Ryan's messages felt impossible. I live in Queens, I said, as though distance might discourage him. We know. That should have unsettled me more than it did. Instead, I was too tired to be properly alarmed. I slid into the back seat, and the door closed behind me with a soft, final sound. The inside of the car smelled like leather and rain. Warm air drifted from the vents. There was a bottle of water waiting in the cup holder beside me, unopened, and a small white paper bag folded neatly on the seat. I looked at it without touching it. "What is that?" I asked. The man in the front passenger seat glanced back. "Food." I did not ask for food. "No," he said. "You did not." That was the strange thing about being looked after when you were used to being overlooked. It did not feel comforting at first. It felt suspicious. The sedan pulled away from the curb, gliding into traffic so smoothly I barely felt it move. City lights slid across the tinted windows in blurred ribbons of gold and red. I sat very still with my purse in my lap and watched Manhattan pass in wet reflections. After 2 blocks, my phone buzzed. Ryan. I did not open the message. A second later, it buzzed again. Then again. The man in the front seat noticed the sound and reached up to lower the partition halfway. A silent offer of privacy. That somehow made it worse. I finally looked down. "Where are you? Why are you not home? Who left with you?" My pulse turned thin and uneven. Another message came through before I could lock the screen. "Answer me, Hannah." I stared at those 2 words until they blurred. "You are not eating," the driver said gently, eyes on the road. I looked at the white bag again. Inside was a grilled chicken sandwich from the cafe next door and a small container of soup, still warm enough to fog the lid. My throat tightened so suddenly it hurt. I had not eaten since noon. No one had noticed except a man I did not know and did not understand. I unscrewed the water with clumsy fingers and took a sip. "Why is he doing this?" I asked quietly, not even sure which man I meant. The passenger was silent for a moment. Mr. Moretti does not like seeing certain things ignored. I turned that over in my head while the rain kept sliding down the windows. By the time we reached my building, my appetite was gone again. The sedan stopped at the curb in front of my apartment, a brick walk-up with a flickering entry light and a front door that never quite shut unless you slammed it twice. Every instinct in me went rigid. Ryan's motorcycle was parked across the street. There are moments when dread becomes so familiar, it almost feels like routine. Seeing Ryan's motorcycle parked under the broken streetlight should have shocked me, but it did not. It only made something inside me go still. The black sedan idled at the curb while rain ticked softly against the windows, and for one suspended second, I let myself imagine asking the driver to keep going. Just drive. Anywhere. Past Queens, past the river, past every bad decision I had spent 2 years trying to survive. But fantasy had never paid my rent, and it had never made Ryan disappear. I tightened my hand around the paper bag in my lap and reached for the door handle. "Miss Brooks," the passenger said quietly before I could step out. I looked up. His expression had not changed, but his eyes were sharper now, tracking the motorcycle across the street, the dim hallway beyond my building, the dark shape of the second-floor window that should have been mine. "If there is a problem, we can wait." I almost said there is always a problem. Instead, I forced a small shake of my head. "No, thank you for the ride." He held my gaze for half a second longer, like he knew gratitude was not the right word for what this was. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a plain white card. No name on the front, just a number embossed in black. "If plans change," he said. I slipped the card into my coat pocket without answering and stepped out into the rain. The sedan did not pull away right away. I could feel it there behind me like a second heartbeat as I crossed the sidewalk and climbed the 3 chipped steps to the front door. The lock stuck, like always. My fingers slipped once on the key. Twice. By the time I got inside, my pulse was loud enough to drown out the hum of the hallway lights. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step a negotiation between fear and exhaustion. The building smelled like bleach, fried onions, and wet wool. Somewhere above me, a television was playing too loudly. Somewhere below, a baby cried, then quieted. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. I clung to them the way people cling to railings when the stairs feel unsteady. My apartment door was unlocked. That was how I knew he was inside. Ryan never waited outside when there was a chance to make an entrance. I pushed the door open and found him sitting at my tiny kitchen table like he paid for it. His leather jacket was draped over the second chair. His helmet rested on the counter beside my chipped coffee maker. One of my cabinets stood open where he had clearly looked through it for no reason except to remind me that nothing in that apartment was mine alone if he decided otherwise. He looked up slowly, his smile thin and joyless. "There she is." I shut the door behind me, careful not to slam it. What are you doing here? Waiting for my girlfriend to answer her phone. His gaze dropped to the takeout bag in my hand, then lifted again. Looks like somebody had a better night than I thought. I set the bag on the counter and took off my coat, buying myself a few seconds. I got cut early. You got driven home in a luxury sedan. His tone was light, almost playful, which was always worse. That does not usually happen after a bad shift. I kept my back to him while I hung up my coat, partly because I did not want him seeing my face, partly because I needed to make sure the card was still tucked deep in the pocket. One of the customers sent a car. That is all. One of the customers. He let the words sit between us, mocking and slow. That sounds expensive. I turned then, forcing my expression blank. I spilled coffee on his suit. He felt sorry for me. End of story. Ryan leaned back in the chair, studying me with the kind of focus that always made my skin feel too tight. His eyes moved over my face, my wrist, the rumpled black uniform still peeking out beneath my sweater. Sorry for you, he repeated softly. Funny. Men do not usually feel sorry for you, Hannah. They look at you. I said nothing. Silence was sometimes safer than the truth, and almost always safer than defense. He stood and walked toward me, not fast, not threatening, just close enough to take up the little space my apartment offered. I caught the smell of rain and motor oil clinging to his jacket. Did you give him a reason to notice you? He asked. My heartbeat stumbled once hard. I was working. That is not what I asked. Before I could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Not loud, not impatient, just one measured sound, like whoever stood on the other side already expected to be let in. The knock came again, just as soft as the first, but in the silence of my apartment it sounded louder than Ryan's voice had a second earlier. We both looked at the door. Ryan's expression shifted in a way I recognized immediately, not confusion, not fear, but offense. Offense that someone would interrupt him. Offense that anyone might reach me without his permission. Are you expecting someone? He asked. No, the word left my mouth too fast. His eyes narrowed. Another knock. Measured. Patient. Whoever stood outside was not nervous. That alone made the tiny hairs on my arms rise. Ryan moved before I could, crossing the apartment in 3 long steps and pulling the door open with a sharp jerk, like he wanted the whole hallway to know he was angry. The man standing there was the same one who had opened the car door for me outside Belladonna. Rain darkened the shoulders of his charcoal coat. He held himself with the same calm precision I had noticed earlier, but now that calm felt different inside my cramped apartment, too polished for peeling paint and secondhand furniture. His gaze swept once over Ryan, once over me, taking in everything without seeming to stare. Miss Brooks, he said, as if Ryan had not opened the door at all. You left this in the car. He held up my phone charger. I blinked. I had not even realized it was missing. Ryan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, trying to block most of the entrance with his body. Who are you? He asked. The man did not answer right away. He extended the charger toward me, not Ryan. One of Mr. Moretti's drivers, he said finally. He noticed it on the seat. Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in it. That was very considerate. The driver's expression did not change. Mr. Moretti is a considerate man. I could feel the room tightening around that sentence. Ryan stepped aside just enough for me to reach past him and take the charger. My fingers brushed the driver's hand for half a second. There was something deliberate in the visit, something too precise to be only about a charger. Then I saw it. His eyes dropped, not to my face, but to the counter behind me where the untouched soup container still sat beside the paper bag. He was checking whether I had made it inside. Whether I had eaten, whether I was alone, whether I was safe. My throat went tight. Thank you, I said quietly. Of course. He looked at me for one more second, and the message in that glance was so clear it almost felt spoken. We are still here. Then he gave a small nod and turned away. Ryan watched him walk down the hall until his footsteps disappeared on the stairs. Only then did he close the door. Slowly, carefully, which was worse than slamming it. Mr. Moretti, he said, testing the name like it tasted bad. You seem to have made an impression tonight. I set the charger on the counter and forced my hands to stay still. I spilled coffee on his suit. He sent me home. That is all. Ryan turned to face me fully, arms folding across his chest. That is not all. Men like that do not send cars and return chargers because a waitress had an accident. Maybe he felt guilty. For what? His eyes sharpened. For looking too long, I wanted to disappear. Into the walls. Into the rain outside. Into the version of myself from 3 years ago who had not yet learned how quickly kindness could become another kind of danger. You are making this into something it is not, I said, but my voice came out thin. Ryan stepped closer, not touching me, just standing near enough to make the air feel crowded. Then prove it. How? Quit. I stared at him. What? Quit belladonna tomorrow. He said it like a solution, like he was rescuing me from something instead of stripping away the only thing that still belonged to me. You do not need to serve men who think they can buy your attention. It is my job. It is a restaurant. It pays my bills. I can help with bills. The words landed heavier than they should have, because we both knew help was never what he meant. I looked past him at the rain shadowing the window above my sink. Somewhere outside, an engine turned over low and smooth. The sedan was still down there, waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I was not the only one who knew this conversation had already gone too far. The most dangerous words in the world are not threats. They are promises spoken softly enough to sound like love. Ryan stood in the middle of my kitchen with rain still shining on his jacket and looked at me like he was offering stability instead of a cage. I can take care of you, he said again, gentler this time, as if changing the volume changed the meaning. I wrapped my arms around myself and leaned against the counter because my knees had started to feel unreliable. The soup Mr. Moretti had sent was still warm beside my hand. Steam fogged the plastic lid in thin white curls, absurdly domestic in a room that felt anything but safe. I do not need you to take care of me, I said quietly. Ryan smiled the way people smile when they think patience deserves praise. Everybody needs somebody. Not like this. The smile faded. Not completely. Just enough to let me know I had stepped onto thinner ice than before. You are tired, he said. You had a bad shift. Some rich guy sends a car, and suddenly you think you are too good for the people who actually know you. I looked at the floor because eye contact had become its own kind of risk. The tile beneath my sneakers was cracked near the sink, a hairline split shaped like a river. I focused on that instead of the way his voice kept softening every time it got more dangerous. That is not what I think. Then what do you think, Hannah? I did not answer. The truth was too large and too fragile to hold in my mouth. I thought I was tired of shrinking in my own apartment. I thought I was tired of measuring every sentence before I spoke it. I thought one stranger in a ruined black suit had seen more in 10 seconds than the man in front of me had chosen to see in 2 years. Ryan moved closer and rested both hands on the counter, one on either side of me, caging me in without touching me. Look at me, he said. I did, because sometimes obeying bought a few precious seconds of peace. His eyes searched my face with an intensity that might have looked like concern to someone who did not know better. Did he give you that card? My stomach dropped so sharply I felt it in my throat. I had forgotten the edge of white stock peeking from my coat pocket where I had hung it by the door. One small mistake. That was all it ever took. What card? I asked, and hated how weak it sounded. Ryan pushed away from the counter and crossed to my coat in 2 steps. By the time I reached him, he had already slipped the card free. Plain white. Black number. Clean and simple and suddenly catastrophic in his hand. He turned it over once and let out a short breath through his nose. If plans change, he read aloud, mocking the words even though they had never been written there. That is interesting. I held my hand. Out. Give it back. He looked at me, then at the card, then back at me again. You kept it. I forgot it was there. You never forget anything when it matters. That was not true, but I had learned long ago that correcting Ryan was like pouring gasoline on a candle and hoping for less fire. He slipped the card into his own pocket instead. You do not need this. Something inside me flinched so hard it almost felt audible. Not because of the card itself. Because of the ease with which he decided what I did and did not need. That is mine, I said. He tilted his head. Is it? My phone buzzed on the counter before I could answer. The sound sliced through the room. Ryan turned toward it first. So did I? The screen lit up with an unknown number, Manhattan area code. My pulse tripped. Ryan saw it at the same moment I did. He did not touch the phone. He just smiled again, slow and cold. Go on, he said. Answer it. The buzzing stopped. For 1 second, relief flickered through me. Then it started again immediately. Same number. Same silent insistence. Outside, through the rain-blurred window, headlights washed pale gold across my ceiling. Ryan stepped back from the counter and folded his arms, settling in like he had front-row seats to something he expected to enjoy. "Answer it, Hannah," he repeated. This time, I picked up the phone. Some phone calls changed nothing. This one changed the air in the room before I even said hello. I lifted the phone to my ear with fingers that did not feel entirely mine. "Hello." My voice came out small, careful, the kind of voice people use when they already know they are being watched. Ryan had not moved. He leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, all lazy patience and sharpened attention, listening to my side of the conversation like he had every right to hear it. For a second, there was only the soft static of an open line and the rain tapping the window over my sink. Then a man's voice, low and familiar, said, "Miss Brooks." Not Dominic. The driver. Calm as ever. Controlled. "I apologize for disturbing you this late." "It is fine," I said automatically, because politeness is a reflex women like me learn before self-preservation. "Mr. Moretti asked me to confirm you made it inside safely." My throat tightened. Ryan's eyes narrowed at once. "I am home," I said. "Thank you." A pause. Just long enough to mean something. "Are you alone?" The question was simple. Ryan's expression changed the instant he understood it. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Interest. A test. I looked at him and knew with absolute clarity that whatever I said next would matter. "Too much." "I am fine," I answered. "Thank you for the ride." The line stayed quiet for one beat, then two. "Miss Brooks," the driver said, and there was something new under the courtesy now. Not pressure exactly. Awareness. "Mr. Moretti does not like unanswered questions." Ryan pushed off the counter. Not fast. Deliberate. He wanted me to see him coming. He wanted whoever was on the phone to hear it in my breathing. "Tell Mr. Moretti," I said, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it, "that I appreciate his concern, but there is nothing to worry about." Ryan stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell rain and leather and the sharp mint of the gum he always chewed when he was angry. He held out his hand for the phone without saying a word. The driver on the line said, very quietly, "Put me on speaker." I did not move. Ryan's hand remained there between us, patient and open, which somehow felt more threatening than if he had grabbed for it. "Who is it?" he asked softly. "The driver," I whispered. "He wants to make sure I got home." Ryan smiled then. A real smile this time, but one with no warmth in it. How thoughtful. He took the phone from my hand before I could stop him and switched it to speaker. The kitchen filled with silence first, then the low hum of the open call. "This is Ryan," he said, like he was introducing himself at a dinner party instead of laying claim to my life in my own apartment. "Hannah is home. You can stop checking on her now." No one answered for half a second. Then another voice came through the speaker, deeper than the first, smooth and unmistakably controlled. "Can she?" The world narrowed to that single question. Ryan's smile disappeared. Mine probably did too, but I could not feel my face anymore. Dominic Moretti did not sound angry. He sounded worse than angry. He sounded certain. Ryan picked up the phone and held it closer. "Who is this?" "A beat. The man who paid for the suit your girlfriend ruined tonight." Ryan laughed once under his breath. "That explains the car. You feeling generous, or do you make a habit of interfering in strangers' lives?" "Only when something appears broken." The words landed in the center of my kitchen and did not move. Ryan's jaw tightened. I saw it. So did Dominic. Somehow, even from miles away. "Hannah is not your concern," Ryan said. "That is where we disagree." The rain seemed louder suddenly. The radiator hissed. Somewhere in the building a door slammed. But inside my apartment, everything held still around that voice on the phone. Ryan looked at me then, and whatever he saw in my face made his own expression harden. "You know what?" he said, lifting the phone again. "Come get your answer yourself." He ended the call before I could breathe, let alone speak. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Then, from outside, through the thin apartment walls and the rain-soaked night beyond them, I heard a car door open. The sound of that car door opening downstairs did something strange to me. It did not calm me down. It did not make me feel safe. It just split the night in half, dividing everything in my apartment into before and after. Ryan heard it too. I saw it in the way his shoulders shifted, in the way his head tilted slightly toward the window, every nerve in him suddenly listening. For the first time since I had walked through my front door, his confidence flickered. Not gone. Just interrupted. "You invited him here?" he asked, and the softness had vanished from his voice completely now. I did not invite anyone. My own voice sounded thin even to me, but it was the truth. I had not asked for Dominic Moretti to notice me. I had not asked for the car, the food, the phone call, the strange and unsettling mercy of being seen too clearly by someone who belonged to a world I had spent my whole life trying not to touch. Ryan took one step toward the window over the sink and pulled the curtain back with 2 fingers. Headlights washed across his face in pale gold. Whatever he saw down on the street made his mouth flatten into a hard line. Then he let the curtain fall and turned back to me. How long has this been going on? The question was absurd enough that I almost laughed, but fear swallowed the sound before it could leave my throat. Tonight, I said. It started tonight. Men like that do not move that fast for no reason. I spilled coffee on him. And now he is parked outside your building in the rain. I did not answer because there was no answer that would satisfy him. The truth sounded ridiculous even in my own head. That a man I did not know had looked at a bruise on my wrist and decided that mattered more than a ruined suit. That another man I had known for 2 years could stand 3 feet away from me and still make my own apartment feel smaller than a coffin. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out the white card he had taken from my coat. He held it up between 2 fingers, stared at the number for a second, then looked at me with a slow disbelief that curdled into anger. You kept a way to reach him. I forgot it was there. Do not lie to me. I am not. The words came out sharper than I intended, and for one breathless second both of us seemed surprised by them. Ryan's expression changed. Not louder. Never louder at first. Just colder. More precise. He tucked the card back into his pocket like he was confiscating evidence and started toward me. Another knock landed on my door before he got there. This one was different from the driver's earlier knock. Still controlled. Still measured. But heavier somehow. Final. The kind of knock that assumed the door would open because resistance was a detail, not a barrier. Ryan stopped. The apartment went silent except for the rain and the weak hum of my refrigerator. 3 more knocks followed, evenly spaced. Then a man's voice carried through the wood, low and unmistakable. Hannah. I had heard Dominic Moretti speak only a handful of times, but his voice had a way of changing the shape of a room. Even through a closed door, even with rain between us, it filled the apartment with a presence so complete it made the walls feel temporary. Ryan looked at me, and there it was at last. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Like he had just realized the game he thought he was playing had rules he did not understand. Do not, he said quietly, when I took a step toward the door. I stopped anyway, not because he told me to, but because my legs had suddenly forgotten how to work. Dominic spoke again from the hallway. I am only going to ask once. Every hair on my arms lifted. Ryan moved fast then, but not toward the door. He moved toward me, catching my wrist in a grip tight enough to make my breath hitch. He bent close, his voice low and urgent now, stripped of all performance. You open that door, and everything changes. He was right. I knew he was right. That was the terrible thing. I looked from his hand around my wrist to the door 3 feet away, rain whispering against the window, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then Dominic's voice came through the wood one last time, quiet as a blade. It already has. The hand on my wrist loosened a fraction before it fell away completely. That tiny release felt louder than the rain. Ryan stepped back, but not because he wanted to. Because somewhere beneath the anger and pride and whatever twisted thing he called love, he understood what I did in that moment. Dominic Moretti was not a problem. You kept waiting in a hallway. He was the kind of man who had already decided how the night would end before anyone else realized they were part of it. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crossed the few feet to the door. Every step felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's life instead of my own. Behind me, Ryan said my name once, low and warning, but I did not turn around. I could not. If I looked back, I knew I might freeze, and I was suddenly more afraid of staying still than I was of whatever waited on the other side of that door. My fingers shook against the lock. The metal slipped once, then caught. I opened the door. Dominic stood in the narrow hallway like he belonged there more than the peeling paint or the dim overhead bulb. He had changed out of the coffee-stained suit jacket, but the black dress shirt beneath it was still crisp, sleeves buttoned, collar open by 1 neat inch. Rain darkened the edges of his shoulders and caught in his hair in fine silver beads. 2 men stood behind him on the landing, silent and alert, but they blurred the second my eyes met his. Up close, the calm in his face was almost unnerving. Not because he seemed cold, because he seemed controlled in a way that made everyone else's emotions look childish. His gaze moved over me once, quickly, taking inventory. My face, my wrist, the apartment behind me. Ryan, standing 3 steps back with tension practically radiating off him. Dominic's eyes returned to mine. Are you coming with me? No greeting. No explanation. Just a question shaped like a door opening. I stared at him. Rain whispered through the open stairwell window at the end of the hall. Somewhere downstairs, a pipe knocked in the walls. The whole building felt like it was holding its breath. She is not going anywhere, Ryan said from behind me. Dominic did not look at him. I was not asking you. Ryan gave a short laugh that did not sound human at all. Then let me make this simple. She is staying here. That was when Dominic finally turned his head. He did not step forward. He did not raise his voice. But something shifted in the hallway anyway, some invisible weight settling into place. Simple, he said softly, as though testing the word. All right, Hannah. He looked at me again, and the room I had spent 2 years shrinking inside suddenly felt too bright, too exposed, too small to survive another lie. Did you ask him to stay? My mouth went dry. Ryan's attention hit me like heat from an open oven. This was it. Not the rescue. Not the dramatic escape. Just a question. Clean. Quiet. Impossible to hide inside. I thought of the missed calls. The unlocked door. The way Ryan had taken the card from my coat pocket and called it his right. I thought of the soup cooling untouched on my counter. Of a stranger noticing I had not eaten. Of another stranger asking if I was alone like the answer mattered. My voice came out barely above a whisper, but it did not shake. No, Ryan made a sound behind me, half protest and half disbelief, but Dominic was already moving. Not toward Ryan. Toward me. He stopped just inside the threshold, close enough that I could smell rain and clean starch, and something darker underneath, expensive and restrained. He took off his coat, unfolded it once, and placed it around my shoulders with a care so deliberate it nearly undid me. The fabric was warm from his body. Heavy. Real. Then get your shoes, he said quietly. You are leaving. People imagine rescue as something loud. A slammed door. A shouted threat. A grand moment that leaves no doubt about who won. But real rescue, I learned that night, could be terrifyingly quiet. Dominic stood just inside my apartment with rain on his shoulders and his coat around me. And somehow that simple fact changed the balance of everything. Ryan looked from the coat to my face and then to Dominic again, as if he still believed this could be turned into an argument between men instead of what it really was. A choice. Mine. This is not your business, Ryan said. His voice was controlled now, tighter than before, like he had realized anger would not help him here. Dominic did not even glance in his direction. Hannah, he said, still looking only at me, your shoes. For one stunned second I did not move. My sneakers were by the radiator where I always kicked them off after work. Such an ordinary thing. Shoes by the door. Soup cooling on the counter. Rain on the window. And yet every object in that room suddenly felt divided into 2 categories. What belonged to the life I had been enduring, and what might still come with me when I left it. Ryan stepped forward. She is upset. That is all. You are making this into something dramatic because you saw a bruise and decided to play hero. That made Dominic turn his head at last. He did not look angry. He looked worse than angry. He looked insulted by the idea that concern could be performance. I did not decide anything, he said softly. She did. Ryan laughed under his breath and dragged one hand through his hair. You met her tonight. And you still managed to tell me exactly who you are. Silence followed that, heavy and airless. I could feel Ryan waiting for me to flinch, to apologize, to smooth things. Over the way I always had. But the strange thing about being seen clearly by one person was that it made hiding from another feel unbearable. I bent and reached for my shoes. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on the edge of the couch to tie them. Dominic stayed where he was, between me and the door, not crowding me, not rushing me, just occupying space like a wall built exactly where I needed one. Behind him, his men remained on the landing, silent and still. Ryan watched me in disbelief that slowly curdled into something wounded. You are actually leaving with him, he said. For tonight, I whispered. That is all. I do not know why I said it that way. Maybe because I was still trying to soften the truth. Maybe because women like me are trained to package our escape in smaller words so men do not hear the finality too soon. Ryan stared at me like he had never seen me before. You think he is going to save you? He asked. Dominic answered before I could. No, I think she is saving herself. The room went still again. I finished tying my shoes and stood carefully, Dominic's coat sliding heavier around my shoulders. It smelled like rain and cedar and something expensive I could not name. It felt absurdly intimate to wear another person's warmth, especially a man I had known for only a few hours, but nothing about that night had obeyed ordinary rules. I reached for my purse on the counter beside the untouched soup. My charger, my keys, my wallet. Evidence of a whole life reduced to what could fit over one shoulder. Ryan saw me check for my keys and made a small, broken sound that might once have moved me. Hannah. Just my name. No accusation. No command. Almost gentle. That was the dangerous part. The part that remembered exactly how to make me doubt myself. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the man I had once met when things were easier, but the constant effort it had taken to survive his version of love. The shrinking. The second-guessing. The endless quiet. I cannot do this anymore, I said. My voice was soft, but it held. Ryan's face emptied in a way that scared me more than shouting would have. Dominic opened the door wider and stepped aside just enough to let me pass first. He did not touch me. He did not need to. I walked through that doorway with my purse on my shoulder and his coat wrapped around me, and the hallway air felt colder, cleaner, real. Behind me, Ryan said my name one last time. I kept walking. On the landing, Dominic fell into step beside me. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside. We started down the stairs together, and somewhere between the second floor and the rain waiting outside, I realized my hands had finally stopped shaking. Freedom does not always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like sitting in the back seat of a black sedan at 11:30 at night, wearing a stranger's coat and realizing you do not know what comes next. Rain streaked the windows in silver lines as the city slid past in blurred gold and red. I kept my purse clutched in my lap and stared at my reflection in the glass, pale and tired and not entirely familiar. Dominic sat beside me, angled slightly toward the door, one arm resting along the seat, as if he understood instinctively how much space I needed. He had not asked me a single question since we left my building. Not in the stairwell. Not on the sidewalk. Not even when I got into the car with my breath coming too fast, and my whole body running on the kind of adrenaline that made everything feel sharpened and unreal. The silence should have felt awkward. Instead, it felt merciful. Across from us, one of his men sat in the jump seat facing forward, speaking quietly into an earpiece I pretended not to notice. The partition remained up. The car was warm. Too warm, maybe, after the cold hallway and the colder choice I had just made. My fingers found the edge of Dominic's coat where it crossed over my knees. The fabric was heavy wool, lined smooth as water, and every time I touched it, I had the same disorienting thought. Someone saw you. Someone noticed you were cold and did something about it. That should not have felt extraordinary. It did. After maybe 15 minutes, the city thinned. Storefronts gave way to wider streets, darker blocks, the occasional pool of light from a late-night deli or gas station. I finally turned my head and looked. At Dominic. In the dim glow from the passing streetlights, his profile looked carved from patience and control. Strong jaw, straight nose, dark hair still faintly damp at the temples from the rain. He must have felt me looking, because his gaze shifted to mine almost immediately. Are you hungry? He asked. Of all the things he could have said, that was not what I expected. I blinked. What? You did not touch the food I sent. Heat rose into my face before I could stop it. How do you know that? Because if you had eaten, the driver would have told me. I should have been alarmed by that level of attention. Maybe part of me was. But a larger, stranger part felt something closer to grief. Not for the night. For all the years no one had paid attention to the obvious. I looked down at my hands. I was not really hungry after I got home. That is not the same as saying you ate. I let out a breath that almost became a laugh, but it broke apart before it reached my mouth. No, I admitted. I did not eat. Dominic reached toward the center console and pressed a button. Change of destination, he said to the driver. Take us to the townhouse. Then he looked back at me. You are going to eat something warm, and then you are going to sleep somewhere with a lock only you can use. The simple certainty in his voice made my chest tighten unexpectedly. "You do not even know me?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know enough." I swallowed hard. Rain whispered against the glass. "That is a dangerous thing to say to someone like me." His gaze did not waver. "No, Hannah. It is a dangerous thing that no one said it sooner." I turned back to the window before he could see how much that landed. The car moved through the sleeping city, steady and smooth, and for the first time in longer than I wanted to measure, I let my head rest lightly against the seat. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the silence returned, but now it felt different. Not empty. Protective. Like the space between one life ending and another one waiting just ahead, hidden in the dark. Houses like Dominic Moretti's were not built for people like me. I knew that before the car even stopped. The townhouse rose out of the rain-dark street like it had been there longer than the city around it. All limestone and black iron and warm light burning behind tall windows. Nothing about it looked flashy. That was what made it intimidating. Real wealth never needed to prove itself. The sedan rolled to a stop beneath a covered entrance, and one of the men outside opened my door before I could reach for the handle. Cool air brushed my face. The rain had softened to a mist, silver under the street lamps. I stepped out wearing Dominic's coat and my own exhaustion, and for one strange second I felt like an imposter walking into someone else's movie. Inside, everything was quiet. Not empty. Controlled. The foyer smelled faintly of cedar, polished wood, and something warm from deeper in the house, maybe bread or soup or coffee. Soft light spilled from wall sconces onto marble floors that reflected every movement. I looked down automatically, suddenly aware of my damp sneakers, my wrinkled black uniform, the faint smudge of concealer that had probably already worn away from my cheekbone. Dominic came around the car and crossed the threshold behind me with the ease of a man entering his own gravity. "You are safe here," he said. It was not dramatic, not possessive, just stated like a fact he intended the house itself to obey. A woman appeared from the hallway to the right, maybe in her 50s, silver threaded through dark hair pulled back neatly at the nape of her neck. She wore a navy cardigan over a simple dress, and her eyes, warm but sharp, took me in with one glance that somehow held no judgment at all. "This is Mrs. Alvarez," Dominic said. "She runs this house better than anyone else in it." Something like amusement touched the corner of his mouth, gone almost before I could trust it had been there. Mrs. Alvarez smiled at me, gentle and immediate. "Come with me, sweetheart. I have soup on the stove and tea if you want it." Sweetheart. 2 years of walking on broken glass inside my own life, and that one soft word nearly brought me undone. I looked at Dominic, unsure whether I was supposed to follow, ask permission, thank him, apologize for existing in his hallway. He seemed to read every tangled thought in my face and save me from all of them. "Eat first," he said quietly. "Questions later." Mrs. Alvarez led me through a kitchen so beautiful it barely looked used, though the warmth in the room said otherwise. Copper pots hung over a wide island. A loaf of crusty bread sat half-sliced beside a cutting board. Something herbal simmered in a white enamel pot, filling the air with rosemary and garlic and the kind of comfort I had stopped expecting from the world. She settled me at a small round table near the back windows and set a bowl in front of me before I could protest. Chicken soup. Real soup, not takeout. Steam curled up against my face, and suddenly I realized how cold I had been all night. "Take your time," she said, placing a spoon beside the bowl. "No one here is in a rush." I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and stared at it for a second too long. No one here is in a rush. I did not know what to do with a sentence like that. In my world, everything rushed. Apologies. Fear. Decisions. Men. I took one spoonful, then another. The broth was rich and salty and steadying. My body seemed to remember hunger all at once. I had eaten half the bowl before I realized someone had entered the room. Dominic stood near the kitchen doorway with his sleeves rolled once to the forearms now, his tie gone, his expression unreadable in the softer light. He did not come closer right away. He leaned one shoulder against the frame and watched me eat like making sure I did not disappear was the only thing on his schedule. "Better?" he asked. I swallowed and nodded. "Yes." My voice sounded rougher than before. More honest. Mrs. Alvarez set a cup of tea beside my bowl and gave Dominic a look I could not quite decode before she drifted out of the room, taking the last of the noise with her. He waited until we were alone, then said, very quietly, "Tomorrow, Hannah, you tell me what you want your life to look like. And this time, no one else answers for you. Some nights do not end when the clock says they should. They end when your heart finally believes the danger has passed, and mine was nowhere near." That kind of trust. Dominic's words stayed in the kitchen long after he said them, settling into the quiet like something fragile and impossible. "Tomorrow, Hannah, you tell me what you want your life to look like. No one else answers for you." I stared down at the steam rising from my tea because looking at him felt harder than looking at the truth. What did I want my life to look like? The question should have been simple. Ordinary people probably answered things like a better apartment, a steady paycheck, maybe a dog, maybe peace. But when you have spent years surviving one day at a time, wanting becomes a skill you forget how to practice. "I do not know," I admitted at last. My voice sounded small in the warm kitchen. "That is allowed," Dominic said. He pushed off the doorway and came closer, but not too close, stopping on the other side of the table where the light softened the hard edges of him without taking them away. Without the suit jacket and tie, he looked less like a threat from another world and more like a man carrying a kind of discipline I had never been able to borrow for myself. Not knowing yet is not the same as having nothing to want. I wrapped both hands around the teacup. The porcelain was warm enough to sting a little. People always say things like that when they have choices. He watched me for a moment, really watched me, and there was no impatience in it. "I had choices," he said quietly. "I also had consequences. The world does not usually offer one without the other." I looked up then. Something in his voice had changed, almost too subtle to catch. Not softer, deeper. Like behind all the control and certainty and carefully measured restraint, there was a history I had not been invited to see yet. Before I could decide whether to ask about it, a phone buzzed somewhere in the house. Not mine. Dominic's gaze shifted toward the hall for the briefest second. Then one of his men appeared near the kitchen entrance, silent as smoke until he spoke. "Sir." Just that one word. But I saw the change in Dominic immediately. His posture straightened. His expression went still in a different way now. All warmth shuddered behind something colder and sharper. He stepped away from the table and met the man halfway across the room. They kept their voices low, low enough that I should not have heard anything. But the kitchen had gone so quiet, I caught a few words anyway. Motorcycle. Building. Refusing to leave. My fingers tightened around the cup. Dominic glanced toward me once, then back to his man. "No police," he said, each word precise. "Not yet." My pulse tripped hard. Ryan. Of course Ryan would not let the night end cleanly. Why would he, when clean endings meant losing control? I set the cup down too quickly, tea sloshing over the rim onto the saucer. "He is still there, is he not?" Dominic turned back to me. He did not lie. I realized instantly that he was not a man who wasted time on false comfort. "Yes." The single word landed in my chest like cold rain. Shame came right behind it, sharp and immediate. Shame that I had brought this to his door. Shame that even here, even now, Ryan's shadow could still stretch far enough to touch me. "I am sorry," I whispered. Dominic's expression changed, not softer exactly, but more intent. He came back to the table and rested one hand against the chair opposite mine, leaning just enough that I had to meet his eyes. "Do not apologize for someone else's refusal to accept the truth." I swallowed hard. "What truth?" The answer came without hesitation. "That you are no longer standing where he left you." The room seemed to narrow around that sentence. Upstairs, somewhere deep in the townhouse, an old floorboard creaked. Rain tapped faintly at the back windows. Everything else held still. "Get some sleep," Dominic said. "In the morning, we decide what happens next." I should have asked what he meant by we. I should have been afraid of the certainty in his voice, the way men like him said things, and made the world rearrange itself around the statement. But I was too tired and too close to unraveling, and for the first time in longer than I could name, I believed someone might actually mean it when they said next. Dominic straightened and stepped back, already turning toward whatever waited in the hallway, whatever fresh complication Ryan had dragged to the edge of this house. At the doorway, he paused and looked over his shoulder at me one last time. "And Hannah," he said, his voice low enough that it felt like a private vow. "The man outside is not the real problem. He is only the first one I saw.